an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Skysworn Chapters 16, 17, and 18. In these chapters, we find out what information Ethan was given about a mission / his heritage, and also he's demoted, and also a crystal gem steps in to save the world for a second. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. I could not stop thinking about the crystal gems and the fusions. Those of you who watch Steven Universe, if you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But this woman who is the matriarch of the Akura clan, I believe, fulfilling her promise to Ethan that she said one time and one time only she will help out. I want to know, I desperately want to know, why this bitch says one time and one time only. What exactly causes her to want to only step in the once? I am guessing it's because she feels that Ethan's actions are the ones that kind of got this rolling. And so, in her opinion, this is his mess, and he bit off more than he can really chew. And so she's gonna mitigate the worst of it out of the gate because he hasn't had enough time to quite prepare, but she expects him to be ready next time because this is going to have a ripple effect with a consequence that goes beyond just the Blood Phoenix waking up, which I guess that's fair, but also it's your world too, and why wouldn't you just want to save it, lady? What's the deal? I don't know enough about being a monarch, so does it cost her something to step in the way that she does? I wouldn't expect that to be the case, because, if you ascend that far, and it costs you so much to do something this badass that you can't do it more than once, or you don't want to do it more than once, that doesn't feel like a great payoff for all that work. I don't know. Is that just me? I'm getting ahead of myself as usual. Let's back up. The beginning of chapter 16. Cassius is basically trying to... He is giving the employees of the Aurelius family, that's what they keep calling, it's Aurelius, they are Aurelius family, they work for them, and they're part of the clan, but they're considered employees. It's an odd thing, because I don't feel like this language is really used with other clans, and I'm not really sure why that is, if it's just because other clans, people tend to be blood relations. I don't think so, though, right? Because the Jai clan was going to try and make Yaren one of them, and so it doesn't seem like they have anything against taking people who aren't of the bloodline. Cassius passed families where only one parent wore the dark blue outer robe of the Aurelius, but the others worked just as hard. He was squeezing 42 people into this barn, and he might have to find room for even more before this was done. Considering that virtually all of their branches in the south had been closed by the advance of the Red Moon Hall and the rise of the Bleeding Phoenix, he was dealing with as many as 50,000 people either evacuated or displaced, and those were only the ones attached to the Aurelius family. The empire as a whole was in a crisis, even if the Phoenix never rose. 50,000 people. That's banana pants. I had no idea. Is that how large the average clan is? That feels like a lot. I have to imagine that that is a special circumstance because of the fact that they sort of provide like this maintenance service. And maybe that's why some of them are called employees, because as he puts it, attached to the Aurelius family, but he doesn't say like of the Aurelius family. I don't know if that's like, you know, sort of a qualifier. But anyway, he is like thinking about how, the worst case scenario, which he then pretty quickly is like, actually, that's not the worst case scenario. But it says in the worst case scenario, he might have to pack everyone up again and find room for them even farther north. He didn't have a way to transport so many people so far, unless Stormrock agreed to help, and he suspected they would be packed to capacity as well, which I'm like, yeah, they are definitely going to be. Well, that wasn't the worst scenario. The Dreadgod might decide to go on a rampage and kill them all, without a monarch to turn it aside into the eastern wasteland or the uninhabited area to the west. If it marched straight north, killing everything in its path and spreading bloodspawn, no evacuation would matter. So, here comes Ethan. I have to imagine, it's hard because I don't have a great grasp of what the Aurelius powers are, you know, that family's powers. I don't really feel like I get it entirely. So I don't know if Ethan is aware that by doing this, he's basically going to put the nail in the coffin of him being the patriarch of the family. I suspect he probably... My suspicion about how the Aurelius, like, site works is that he can see things that are going on, not the future, and not... It's like a supernatural perception, but I believe that it only has to do with what's happening in the present. But he has such a good grasp of what has gone on from moment to moment due to having this perception all the time, that he is an excellent judge of people's characters and what they are likely to do. That's my, like, guess as to how this works. So basically, we all have patterns. We all have, like, personality quirks that cause us to make certain choices over and over again. And I am going to guess he can see the choices that people have made in the past and use that to inform, as he's watching what's happening in the present, what's likely to happen in the future. So it's not like he sees the future. It's just that he has a huge advantage in predicting the future because of this awareness and the fact that it's applying to so many people's, like, personal decisions and stuff. And again, that's just a guess. I have to assume, therefore, that he has a suspicion this is going to be the result of him telling Cassius what he does, because he has to know that everybody is sort of, like, on the fence about him being the Underlord as it is. Like, they already are feeling like, I don't know, guys, I don't think he can be trusted. I think we need to do something. We know that that's already going through people's minds. So I'm going to assume he's rolling the dice here with the understanding that likely he will be ejected. And if he is, I am going to also assume it does not matter to him personally as much as most people, I think, would be, their ego would be really bruised. It would be a matter of pride. And probably also, I would think, not look great for the Aurelius clan. I feel like them basically demoting their patriarch gives an impression of weakness. But Ethan seems much less concerned with reputation than a lot of other sacred artists do. He's got such a long game in mind. He's got such a larger goal that he worries about reputation in the context of what that can do for him and how he can play people based on their concern about their reputation. But he doesn't seem to have, like, an ego tied up in his reputation the way a lot of people do. So I think it's like a bummer that they don't trust him in his mind, but not being the patriarch anymore isn't going to have a real material effect on him. He's just kind of like, that sucks. I feel like I've proven that you guys can trust me, but okay, I guess not. And that seems to be sort of where he sits with that once we see him later. But at this point, Cassius asks, have you come to help with the evacuation? Ethan laughs at him and says, I've received some new information. Suffice to say, this will not be the only disaster of this scale in the coming years. We may be heading for interesting times ahead, little brother. And Cassius's response immediately is, I'm not your brother. Which I feel a little bad about, that he's like so eager to sort of distance himself, considering that they are the only two left of the actual bloodline. Like, okay, maybe you're not, but come on. You know why he's using that sort of language. Like, is it just that Cassius feels like this is diminishing him? Like it's sort of condescending, I guess? I guess I can understand that. So he had to know if Ethan had gotten this information from a reliable source or if he was relying on his own guesses. Knowing that a disaster was coming could make all the difference. He said as much, and Ethan nodded along. I cannot reveal my source, but it is worthy of trust. And Cassius is like, all right, then we need to stop everything we're doing. We should pull all of our people back and prepare for sieges. We have to tell the Empire the information that you've got, and, you know, they can deal with whether or not they want to punish us for pulling back and leaving them high and dry for maintenance people and, you know, or hope that they are going to understand the danger and begin to take measures themselves. To which Ethan basically is like, no, we're going to be sending people out to deal with this. The South and West. The South was a slaughterhouse, and the West was the home of the crumbling Jai clan. And Cassius says, so you want me to send people to die? And Ethan says, no, those places are where we're needed. We're equipped to help rescue and repair efforts as well as to gain information. That information will soon be very valuable, especially the Western Labyrinth. As will the Allies, our assistance will earn us. And Cassius is basically like, yeah, I mean, that all sounds fine if it weren't for the fact that they will be eaten by fucking bloodspawn. Like, you're acting like this isn't an immediate danger. You can't ask them to. This is when Ethan steps in. I'm not asking them to do anything. Put the best face on it. And certainly don't feed anyone to the Dreadgod. But I am commanding them to take a riskier path for greater reward to the family. Make it so, Cassius. This is too far for him. Cassius just can't, you know, and the thing about this, I can't decide because Cassius has to know, or no, Ethan has to know that Cassius has this, like, moral line that he won't cross. It's unclear to me whether he realizes that Cassius will just straight up not do what he's asking here. Does he genuinely want that done and is heartbroken that Cassius didn't follow through and do it? Or is he aware Cassius will likely not do it, but he had to, like, make the suggestion and hope he would? It's just, I don't really know. I don't want to give Ethan too much credit for knowing things, because as we saw, the Jai clan got the better of him. Like, he's not omniscient. He is able to see things, but it seems to me that he has to choose to focus on those things in order to see them. So it's like he could have foreseen that the Jai clan was a threat if he had stopped and, like, looked at the Jai clan very, like, closely. But instead, they were so careful and seemed like such a non-issue that he didn't waste his time paying attention to what was going on with them because it wasn't something that was a priority at the moment. So, yeah, anyway, Ethan leaves, and Cassius's wife comes out, and he tells her what Ethan said, and she's like, look, we definitely owe him. I'm not trying to deny that, and I still feel that way. But also, we have a family, and we have a duty to them, and we can't just do what this dude is telling us when it goes against all of our better judgment and against the duty that we've, this gratitude and debt we owe him is not enough to outweigh this. And I'm like, I think that's a very solid point. I pretty much agree with her, to be honest. And Cassius, it says, Cassius nodded along. He let Ethan overwhelm him, causing him to forget his other options. Although, did he really have any? I love that. He'd let Ethan overwhelm him. That's one of those things that as I get older, I'm a bit better at spotting it when it happens. But that is such a real thing that it's one of those things where, like, you wind up later in the shower thinking back on how it went down and you suddenly realize what that person really fucking said to you and what you should have said to them. But in the moment, you are so taken in by their attitude of being right and the language that they used to make something that's totally unreasonable seem reasonable in that moment, that it's not until you walk away that you go, wait, that's bullshit. What the fuck oh my God. And Ethan seems 100% like the kind of person that could have that effect on people and just cause them to sort of like lose the thread of the other options available to them. It's like sort of, I mean, that's kind of what happened with Lyndon and choosing Black Flame, He very carefully like showed him these options and then made it extremely clear Black Flame was really the only and the best one. It's not like other options weren't on the table, but he just comes at Lyndon with such intensity about this one direction of action. That makes sense. I wonder if he has like any sort of ability in that area, or if it's just the force of his personality. So his wife, Jing, says, you have to take this to your father. And Cassius is like, God damn it. I am going to have to do this. And this is like I'm betraying Ethan, because I absolutely know that they are going to try and take him down a peg because of this. And he's contemplating what it's going to be like to bring this to his father. And then all of a sudden, this horrific screech echoes through the air. And Jing is able to protect them because she's kind of created this barrier with wind, which is really cool. And the red light gets like way more intense. And he knows that this means that the Phoenix is rising. I am so into, and this is one of those things that's like, it's not new, but nevertheless, I feel like it's sort of underused a little bit. I am so into the concept of sound as a weapon. I think that is just a really cool idea that I think part of why it's underused is that it's a difficult thing to explain as an author and a difficult thing to get across on screen if you are filming something. We don't have a lot of context for it in our everyday lives. And so I feel that there are authors who just don't really, like, they don't get the impression that it's going to have the same effect on the reader that they would get if they did something a little bit more, like, tangible. And really, you know, it's also something that's like, it's got a finite amount of damage that can be done, because once you bust your eardrums, then what? It's not really, because sound could also shake things apart and make them sort of like discorporate. But I can see how it feels sort of like limited in a way. But I think that this is a really cool moment here, because we jump from them experiencing this and him being like, oh, fuck, to Linden. And it says, the whole city shook, the table in Linden's arms shaking as though in an earthquake. All from the force of a scream that was more than a scream, as though the sound had been given life. It was layered, like 1,000 birds shrieking at once, so loudly that he felt a sharp pain in both ears. A moment later, warm liquid trickled down both sides of his face. And at this point, I'm like, not even thinking what I should be thinking, which is, oh God, blood. It should have occurred to me. There's a lot to keep track of. That's all I have to say to defend myself. It's understandable. So he opens his copper sight and he sees that everything is tinged red. And he doesn't even try and look to the south where the bleeding phoenix is coming from. He just looks around in general and he's just like, oh God. Mercy has blocked up her ears with that like black tar like substance that's on her hands and like on her staff. And that comes in handy for her quite a bit. Like, we see her using that stuff later, and it is pretty cool. Renfei stood on dark platforms of solid cloud that she had generated with her Madra, face horrified, and Byro was clinging to his emerald 1,000-mile cloud like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. Blood ran from their ears as well. Orthos had let himself fall, slamming the side of his shell into the far wall. His sanity had fled before the Dreadgod, his Madra raging up, and it was taking all his self-control to keep from breathing fire in the general direction of the bleeding phoenix. However badly off the rest of them were, whatever changes the phoenix's aura was making in their bodies, Yeren was worse. And I wondered if this was going to be how it was for her, that like, once this thing kind of ascended, she would just completely be taken over by her blood shadow. And it tries. It sure tries. So the blood is spilling from her stomach. And it looks like something is going on. And then he realizes that it's the blood shadow. And Byro, like the pussy little bitch-ass motherfucker he is, picks her up, flies off, and drops her in midair. I hate him. Dishonor on you, dishonor on your cow. I want you dead. I want your family dead. I want your house burned to the ground. Byro, fuck you. Okay? He's so like, I really believe, I do think that he believes that Yeren is going to betray them. However, I also think that he is so fucking personally salty over the fact that he missed the blood shadow in her core, that he takes that in particular personally in a way that like hurts his pride. And that is part of why he is so extra bitter about this situation. And I just can't have that. I don't appreciate when somebody's ego gets in the way of things like that. And watching Yeren on the ground looking like she's bleeding, you really should get the sense that she is not... She's a victim of this thing, you know? But he just doesn't fucking see it. He doesn't get it. He doesn't ask. He hasn't tried to, like... He seems to really think that she's some sort of, like, secret agent for the fucking Red Moon cult, rather than talking to her about the fact that this thing has been thrust upon her from when she was a child and she wants no part of it. And I just don't have a lot of respect for people who don't communicate and actually get somebody's entire side of the story. So he goes off, and Lyndon grabs his own 1,000-mile cloud and his pack, and he goes right the fuck after them. And I didn't really know when I read this the first time, and Lyndon's like heading straight after them. I was kind of like, oh, I mean, probably he is going to do something bad, so I guess this makes sense. But it didn't occur to me how dramatic it was going to be. I kind of expected him to like take her somewhere else and let somebody else deal with her. The idea of just dropping her in midair never even occurred to me. So yeah, it turns out Lyndon's got pretty solid judgment here. He thinks and moves quickly. And he is flying, and it says, like, when he looks around and opens his spirit, he feels that he is drowning in blood. Strangely, the overpowering sense of the Dreadgod actually made it easier to sense what he was looking for. There was only one spot of power that was hanging in the air instead of cowering in a building, and Lyndon headed straight for it. It was to the south. It was so large as to defy description, swallowing half the sky and stretching into the clouds. Each of its feathers was an oozing, flowing blob, as though it had been made from clumps of crimson gel pushed together. Its beak was curved like a scythe and razor sharp, and its eyes were shapeless masses of white-hot power. Weird, right? I should have anticipated that it was going to seem more like this. For some reason, I expected, because I think I have this like mental association with phoenixes and fire. I kind of expected the bleeding phoenix to look like flames, like its feathers would be flames. And for it to be like jelly, real weird. You know, that's one that I do not get. And not like I don't get it like in terms of the author's choice on this, because it's the bleeding phoenix. So it's like that in terms of texture makes sense, but I can't picture it. So it spreads its wings and cries out again. And Lyndon like tries to protect his ears, but it doesn't matter. Like he starts bleeding again and blood spawn form beneath him in midair. And they try and like grab at him, but they just hit the ground, splatter, and then reform. And I just have to say how unfair it is that they can like splatter and then just reform again. That's just really mean-spirited, I feel. So he sees Byro release Yeren. Her blood shadow clawed for him as she fell, but he defended himself with Yellow Madra. Without waiting to see her fall, he turned and started flying his cloud after the city. So Lyndon is pushing his cloud as fast and hard as he can to try and catch her before she hits the ground. And he tries to like reach out for her, and his fucking arm, his new arm that he still doesn't have total control over, flinches away in response to the blood shadow, which is trying to seek him out. And he starts, because he has to use his Madra in order to fuel the flying cloud. So once it gets to the point that he is like pushing it too hard, his Madra is overriding the cloud Madra that it's made of, and sort of causing it to like disintegrate. And he's trying to grab her, he can't do it, and then all of a sudden there's this horrible pain, and there's like an arrow in his shoulder, and the arrow is attached to a net that wraps around Yeren. I should have kind of like figured, because it was black and the way that it worked, that it was going to be Mercy, but I went this whole time until she like, you know, reveals herself going, what is happening? And it turns out, yeah, this is Mercy. And I was like, I mean, she's injured him, but I guess she's kind of saved him too. But when she pulls the arrow out of his shoulder, it's like, doesn't even leave a wound or anything later, because it's not a real regular arrow. So he manages to like keep the cloud going only 5 feet from the ground, which is when they fall. They are mostly fine. And I put fine in quotes because like they weren't crushed on landing, but they're still not really fine. And she lands and he's just like, holy shit. Thank you. I really I owe you so bad. And I can't believe that you followed after me. And she says, I'm not the only one. And then we see a meteor, which is, of course, Orthos in his shell shooting from the flying, from, what were they? They were in Storm City or Storm Cloud. Can't remember what they call it. I am so excited, guys, that it looks like this, like, ragtag group is gonna be the thing. I'm sure there'll be other people like added to the crew as time continues, but I am all about Orthos being an official part of things. I wasn't really sure how that would go on because he is sort of a, what's the word in order to not make this sound insulting? Because I was going to say clumsy. He's a bit cumbersome in terms of his agility and, the size of him, the fact that he's all fire. But I find him as a character to be so much fun that it would have really been a bummer to lose him in the main part of the story. And as far as Mercy, Ethan has got his eye on her already. He's like trying to play it cool, as we see a little bit later, but he wants her as part of this band that he's creating. I wonder if he wanted Orthos as well, or if Orthos just is sort of like a circumstantial addition because of the contract that Orthos made with Lyndon. And he just is sort of like, well, Orthos is also strong and I guess that's fine. Or if he really wanted Orthos also to be part of this whole thing. I don't know. So they are overcome like with the threat of these blood spawn, and they find this house that they can sort of hide in. And meanwhile, Yaren is like semi-conscious, unconscious. She is not available. So they have to carry her over to this shelter that they find, and he draws a script on the door that's meant to keep remnants away. Even though Bloodspawn aren't technically remnants, he's just hoping that this is close enough to whatever they are to be effective. And there's an interesting thing here about his arm and the way his arm deals with a Bloodspawn. It seized any of the spirits that came too close, gripping them by the throat as though they were made of flesh. The Bloodspawn froze when the white claw took them. They trembled, flashed with power, and eventually dissolved into dark, dried flakes. The arm always glowed brighter when it did so, and the sense of hunger radiating from it grew stronger. It was taking something from the spirits, but he couldn't figure out what. The arm wasn't turning red, and there was no hint of blood Madra in his channels. It was either taking something other than Madra, or it was processing the power so efficiently that Lyndon couldn't sense any waste. And I have no idea what to make of that. I still don't have enough confidence in my understanding of the magic system to really guess here. All I can think is that it's like turning blood Madra into pure Madra, and just the blood aspect is the part that like flakes away and floats away. And what he's getting is pure Madra. However, if that's true, I don't understand why he can't sense an influx of Madra, or if it's stored in his arm and he has to like somehow access it, like it's a battery. I don't know. But I'm very curious to hear about the properties of this a little bit later. So they go into this building, and she is like thrashing around, and he has to like give her something to bite down on so that she doesn't bite her own tongue off. And he sees that the blood shadow is like wrapped around her, like a robe almost. And because of the fact that she had said previously that it basically will like wear you, that seemed like real bad news to me. So he tries a couple of things, using an empty palm on her. She bucked again, but the blood shadow didn't seem to mind. It wasn't anchored in Yaren's core, but around it. He could feel that now, though the haze of the bleeding phoenix still hung in the aura around him. He couldn't shake it loose. His Sylvan River seed couldn't cleanse it. There was one more thing he could try. There was some relationship between the blood shadow and the material of his arm. It almost made sense. The bleeding phoenix was awakened by the power hidden in the same labyrinth where he'd found the ancestor spear and the binding of Hunger Madra. It seemed as though this piece of the phoenix's power wanted to feed on his arm, rather than the other way around, but the binding in his arm was supposed to devour Madra. It was possible that he could tear it free. Reminder that Fisher Gesha told him to fucking wait for over a month before he triggered this binding. So this is super dangerous. And there's the potential that by trying to do this, he's just going to pull that blood shadow into his core. And he's acknowledges, like, it might not even go into my core. It hasn't gone into her core. But he's just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever it is, it's better if it happens to me than to her. Which there's really no reason to feel that way, except that he just values her life more than his, which seems on brand for Lyndon. It just does. And I do like that the concept of it going into his core, he's even like, I do have 2 cores, so I guess if that happens, it's like, it can be just trapped in the one. That's not so bad. So he puts his palm on the surface of the blood shadow, triggers the binding, and then we go into Yaren's head. And she is desperately trying to hold on to this thing and keep it from leaving, because in her experience, when it has left her body, it just went around and just massacred everybody around her. So she's spiritually doing what she did when she was a little girl, just literally hanging on to it. And she feels something beginning to pull. And it says, arms of blood Madra wrapped around Lyndon's pale right arm. They stuck as though they were covered in suckers, and the Madra burned where it made contact. Being a remnant arm, it felt more like burning his spirit than his body, but that was an ache all its own. But it starts working. And it says the binding had released a vortex of white light, which was meant to devour the shadow, but the parasite sought to feed on the arm instead. They were stuck together as though nailed, but Lyndon couldn't pull the shadow the last few inches. There was still a short tether connecting the blood shadow to her core. And then blood shadow crashed through the door, and he doesn't have any choice, and he just yanks it out of her. And then this fucking thing basically takes shape and looks just like Yaren. And it's not the same as the blood spawn. It's because those look like glass, like they're almost transparent. And this is something that's like thicker and clearly made of a different substance, even though it's also red. And Yaren sort of wakes up and just says, "What did you do?" And he picks up a sword. And Yaren, in her mind, is just like, oh my God, babe, no. Like, he's so not proficient with the sword that it's like hurts her to watch, which I can understand. And she's basically like, this thing is free. That's it. We're dead. And Lyndon's like, no, we can kill it. We can kill it. We can do it. And she just is like, dude, this is what it fucking does. It drains whatever power, and then it goes back to its big mama and feeds the mama with whatever it's stolen. And Lyndon says there's one more outcome. How do the emissaries? The parasite moved and his burning cloak ignited once again. It felt like tearing his soul in half. Poor Lyndon is really at the end of his fucking rope. So then we jump into Yaren's head. And we have this moment of her finally being like, I guess I'm going to have to do what Ethan suggested. And it's very similar to the last book when she finally accessed her master's remnant and tore it apart for parts. Ethan has been telling her that that's what she needs to do, but she's very resistant. She doesn't want to handle it that way. And honestly, considering how Blood Madra seems to work and its associations, I can't even really fault her that much for this thing feeling like it's capitulating, you know? But at this point, there aren't a lot of options left to her. She couldn't do it. This was the demon that had haunted her from the inside for most of her life. She hated it with a burning passion, and it was the one thing that frightened her. And she's watching Lyndon, and she's just like, oh, God. He's not going to be able to manage this if I don't do something. He's fucking dead. I don't know what I'm going to... And then she's just like, you know what? I've fought hopeless fights before. That's basically like all I've done. So if he thinks that we can beat this, and I don't think we can beat this, well, what the fuck? Since when has me believing that I'm going to win ever been a factor in me actually winning? That's never been something that I've worried about. So fuck it. I'll just do this. And I was like, you know what, girl? Yes, that is the attitude. You just kind of have to go into something and you're going to be like, I'm going to do my very fucking best. I have no idea how it's going to shake out. And really, how it shakes out is none of your business. You just have to do what you can do because that's what you can live with, you know, assuming that you live. So she gets into this fight, and Mercy, meanwhile, is handling all these fucking bloodspawn by creating these like black tar like spider webs that are catching them and like holding them down. They don't kill them, but they definitely like slow them up. And Mercy stood up. A bloodspawn exploded at the top of the stairs, its power eating through the black web that protected them, but she didn't look to the sound. The purple in her eyes spread out until it stained the whole eye. Looked like she had gems stuck in her face. She was about to do something, Yaren reasoned. Too bad she was late. Yaren's anger and fear had finally come to blows, and she realized which one had always been stronger. The rage. She kicked off and dove for the mass of blood that had stolen her shape. It turned, slashing out at her with the blade over her left shoulder. Yaren had one of those herself. So, they go at it, and meanwhile, I'm just like, what's going on with Mercy? She did this thing. Why? I want to see what's happening with Mercy. And all of a sudden... the shadow slips into her. And she says, "Get out." A rope of red madra burst from her core, stretching for Lyndon's arm. She barely caught it with both hands. "Why?" she hissed. "Why aren't you running?" And Lyndon's like, "I'm waiting for you." "What?" And she's just looking at him like, "Are you fucking kidding me? I'm trying to like give you a getaway." And he's like, "A getaway? The emissaries of Red Moon Hall did it. And you are way better than them at most things. I'm pretty positive that you can do this. I'm not worried about it." And I love that. When you put it like that, it didn't sound so bad. Instead of trying to push it back into place with her unsteady and failing Madra, Yeren reached out to the blood shadow like it was her Madra, her spirit, part of her. It resisted her, of course, but this didn't have to do with advancement level. It was pure grit, and as far as that went, she wouldn't lose to anybody. I love it. I love it so much. So, Mercy's asking if there's anything they can do for her, for Yeren. And I don't know, I still don't really get what happened with her eyes being full of gems, if that was like what fuels her making these webs or what. And also I should mention that Lyndon slashes at a blood spawn with the sword that he picked up, and it says, it froze, then shattered. That was strange. The blood shadow hadn't done that. Maybe it was a property of the Madra that had gone into making the sword's blade. It had always given him the impression of icy cold. So I find that really interesting, and I wonder if we're going to get any more information about that. So, this is when Mercy says, I have one more trick, hoping to save it, sorry. And she does this thing and all the blood spawn freeze. And it says, relieved, he turned. Yeren stood with her hand held out, trembling, and a red shadow stood beside her. And she's won. She's won, and she's like, check it out. And she can make this shadow like move according to what she needs. And she's like, obviously, I'm going to need more practice with this, but that's pretty awesome, actually. I'm a little bit impressed with it. Meanwhile, Orthos just comes through stomping onto the blood spawn and splattering it. And some of them like burst into flames. Others are just destroyed. Orthos, you are very direct, and I appreciate it. So Mercy at this point gets distracted from Yeren's awesome new weapon and just says she's here, get down, and throws herself onto the ground. And as she says this, all of a sudden Lyndon gets that perception of somebody new being nearby. And it says he let himself fall to the ground and the house above them was torn away. It was as though a shovel the size of a mountain had scooped out the ground in a second. Between one instant and the next, the view above Lyndon transformed from a dirt ceiling to a red-stained sky. He had seen nothing but a wave of dark purple, felt nothing but overwhelming, crushing power. And Mercy's telling him, we can't stay here, we need to get out. And then the sun basically goes dark. And he thinks that there's a wall of amethyst. And later on, he realizes that it's just this monarch's foot. That's how fucking humongous she is. And when Mercy says she's here, we have to get down, I thought it was going to be somebody like coming after her specifically. But what she's worried about is she knows exactly how huge, because this turns out to be her mother, she knows how huge her mother can get when she's handling something like this, and is very aware of how minuscule they are, and therefore vulnerable because of being just out in the open while she's about to get into a fight with this massive fucking monster. And I love just the sheer size of the two of them and the way that they're so big that it's almost difficult for Lyndon to even like make sense of it as he's watching. There came a flood of color and power as the two monsters exchanged blows, but he couldn't even catch a glimpse. A wall of heat and pressure pushed against Lyndon's face. The skin of his scalp pressed back against him and his eyes spiked with pain. He fell back, but raised 2 fingers to his eye. Blood ran like tears. Ugh! He's like God damn it, my eyes, my ears. I mean, I can heal and shit, but this is just not great. So at this point, they're trying to haul him away. And he is trying to fight them and saying, please, please, I have to see. Basically, when you get down to it, Lyndon is fanboying so hard that he's about to let himself be killed over it. Lyndon, look, I get it, sweetie. I would want to see too. Don't get me wrong. But no, now is not the fucking time. This isn't a film. Get out of the fucking way. And Mercy tells him she'll be fighting for days. And this is when we get the reveal that that's her mother. So, indeed, about 3 days passed. And they are hidden in the cellar. There's enough food, and they actually are able to get access to water. After the first day, the sounds of battle had faded to those of a thunderstorm. By the end of the second day, they disappeared entirely, and the red haze had vanished from the sun. Only then did the blood spawn completely vanish. Most of them had been torn to pieces in the wake of the Titanic conflict, but stragglers still formed until the red aura withdrew. Meanwhile, everybody is fucking wrecked. Lyndon can't cycle. And it turns out that his Madra channels are what's fucked up, because I wasn't understanding how this worked. It says, Little Blue had worked on him with every spark improving his shattered spirit, but each of her touches caused him agonizing pain. Each time it was like setting a broken arm. She hated that he was in pain, but still tried her best, but he wasn't her only patient. Yaren and Orthos needed help as badly as he did. Her power was stretched thin, and the store of pure scales in his pack wasn't endless. Eventually, she paled and had to curl up in her case again, the crack hovering over her like a frozen lightning bolt. If his Madra channels had been in better shape, he could have shared his power with her. As it was, he needed to feed her if he wanted her to help, but she needed to help him before he could heal her, so they were stuck, waiting. So, at this point, Ethan shows up. With his fucking usual, well, I can't believe how bad you smell. You could at least bathe. And I'm like, you know what, Ethan? Most of the time I find you amusing. I am getting over that. You are starting to irritate me, sir. You are. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't be so fucking cavalier about everything and appreciate what they have gone through and the fact that they have, nearly died. Stop being an asshole. It's fine. They will still progress. They will still learn. They will still be tough, even if you give them a fucking break for a second. So, we have this moment, first of all, where he tries to pretend that he didn't know who Akura was. And Lyndon's looking at him like, Lyndon knows. He's starting to really get a better sense of, who Ethan is as a person. So he says, I have some news that you'll enjoy and some that you will not. Which would you prefer first? And Yaren says, I could use some cheer, to which he's like, okay, bad news first. I do not know how the Skysworn will react to your absence. It could be that you are wanted for capture. Allow me to follow with the good news. I have successfully completed a difficult task for Naru Gui, and he owes me a favor. Although it was not actually difficult for me, but that was not a relevant detail to share with the Empire. They will punish you lightly just for the sake of appearance, but then they will allow you to continue serving the Skysworn. To which Yaren's like, continue serving the motherfuckers who just dropped me like I was trash? And that's a completely fair way to feel about it. 100% Team Yaren on that. And he's like, look, I get it, but you made a vow. You're still alive. You're officially Skysworn. Even I can't really do anything about it because you made that promise. If it eases your mind, at least know that they won't be trying to kill you so aggressively anymore. Not now that I'm openly in favor. I guess I'm not really, like, maybe it won't be as open, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And Mercy, for her part, says, they think we're the enemy. We just have to show them we're all on the same side. Yaren and Lyndon stared at her. Ethan pointed. That's the spirit. Another piece of good tidings. The bleeding phoenix has retreated. And Lyndon says she didn't kill it. Are you serious? And I'm like, did you not listen to him before? He has made it very clear that they can't really be killed. As far as anybody knows, they can be driven back. That's what you can do. They go back into hibernation, but they are always around. They don't die, Lyndon. So I know that bitch looked very powerful, and you thought that if anybody could kill this fucking thing, she could. She isn't the only monarch to have ever existed. They have come to blows before, and if they haven't done it by now, they can't do it. So he says that monarchs can destroy its body temporarily, but it always forms again, although in this case, that isn't what happened. And Lyndon has this moment of being like, oh, he wants us to ask what happened. He wants us to, be all agog. And he doesn't want to give Ethan the satisfaction, but at the same time, he's like super interested. So Ethan says the honored monarch fought for 2 days and nights until her armor was cracked and leaking essence. She would surely have had to retreat in only another hour or two, and the Phoenix had sustained no injury. Their battle had spilled into the eastern wasteland, but it would be nothing for the Dreadgod to turn back and return to our lands. Then the Phoenix fell apart. I saw it myself. It just split apart. I have only a theory, but I believe it's a likely theory. It's biding its time. Usually, it's sleeping, and this time I believe it's still awake. I think it realized it was fighting for no reason, that the objective which had pulled it out of its long slumber was no longer attainable, so it decided to wait for its brothers. And then he's like, ooh, sorry, I guess that's not good news. I was supposed to be focusing on the good stuff. But there it is. So this is when he asks Lyndon about the doors into the labyrinth that he saw in Sacred Valley. And he's like, can you tell me more about what Suriel said to you? And Lyndon's like, yeah, I sure can, as soon as you share some of your fucking details. And Ethan's like, all right, look, I promise, I swear, I will absolutely tell you. But please, you go first. And Lyndon's like, fine, because he wants to argue, but there's a point at which fighting Ethan just feels like sort of fruitless. So he tells the entire story. He glossed over the personal details, especially the parts with his family, until he came to his death. Something marched into Sacred Valley, my home. It was just a shadow, blotting out the sun, but it waded through the mountains like they were made of sand. That's how I was supposed to die. Suriel gave me a chance to avoid that, and she showed me some people who could have saved me. Luminous Queen Shamiara, Northstrider, and the 8-Man Empire. And Ethan's like, well, that makes sense. They're some of the most powerful people in the world. I actually thought Northstrider was dead, but if she showed him, then I'm supposing that's not true. The reputation of the 8-Man Empire is supposedly exaggerated, though if the Suriel rates them so highly, then presumably popular opinion is in error. And he says, all right, so my theory is, considering the doors in your valley, that another Dreadgod is going to show up and fuck up your home. And, there's a door right there. That's what makes sense. They hunger for whatever is in this maze, on their way to it, or perhaps one of the monarchs doing battle with them was destined to crush your valley underfoot. And Lyndon's like, okay, well, she said that I had 30 years. Is that enough time? And Ethan's like, well, thing is, first of all, no, 30 years isn't enough. Most people don't think a lifetime is enough. And Secondly, I don't think we've got 30 years anymore. Something happened, and they got no advance notice about this Dreadgod the way that they should have. Like, they would have probably been seeing hints of this, maybe even like years in advance, if not months, and they only got it weeks ahead. So something happened very suddenly to twist everything around with fate, and I think something has been sped up. You've got less time. I don't know how much less, but perhaps much less. And poor Lyndon is just like, motherfucker. Like, this was already such an impossible thing. And the idea that now he's on a tighter schedule is just so, it's just, he can't even, you know? He just can't even, which I really understand. And this is when Ethan hands him the little ball, that little marble from his side of the story. And he gets transported to this moment where it's like a recording, basically, of Osriel. And he says, "If you have found this, that means you are one of the descendants I've left behind. Lucky you. I left behind this message in case one of you or any of you inherits some spark of my desire. I determined that there must be more beyond the world I could see, and I was not content to stay trapped like a fish in a pond." And he begins to show all of these different worlds, and it's, of course, very overwhelming. And Lyndon, I love the moment when Lyndon realizes that the planet is round. And is just like, what? It's a ball? I heard somebody say it might be a ball, but that just didn't make any fucking sense to me. It's very fun. I really did like that. And he says, "This is the central planet of the world we call Cradle, iteration 110. It is larger than average for an inhabited planet, with vital aura making it both harder and easier for humanity to spread. At the moment of this recording, over 600 billion souls call this place home. And this planet is but the central fragment of the world called Cradle. Your moon, your sun, each of the stars, they exist only here." And starts talking about iterations and the way that they work. And he opens this rift and they pop into another one. And he starts talking about how they all have their own populations. And then he talks about the Abaddon. And we see all of these figures. And Lyndon is looking for Suriel, and at first he can't find her, and then he finally does spot her, and he gets sort of like emotionally overwhelmed by it. And he says, "We draw our power from the way. This is what you see all around you now. It is the power of order that runs through all iterations. Without us, all would fall to chaos." And then we see all of these people dying, choking. And Lyndon, it's like affecting him as if he knows each one of these people, and watching them die is personally affecting him as if he knows them all. And he just, again, gets so overwhelmed. Like all power, ours has rules. This is a necessary truth. One of those rules restricts our interference. For centuries, I've watched worlds die, and the pain you now feel, I feel with each death, over and over again in worlds without end. And I'm like, that's rough, dude. That sucks. Like, no wonder this is something that he's trying to like fight against. Yeah. Christ, really? Finally, when Lyndon was on his knees, they returned to the calm of the way. Osriel met his eyes. "There is one part of my plan, only one seed planted of many, in the hopes that some might one day bear fruit. I need you to join me, not as Abaddon. I want to raise you outside their rules. I want you to go where we can't, into dying worlds to save those we have abandoned." What? I love this. You can step out of the cradle. You can grow up and join me. I love this idea. He's like, I want you to be as powerful as an Abaddon, but like not an Abaddon because they have rules and shit, and I'd rather you didn't. And I'm like, you know what? I also would rather they didn't because I want to see that shit. Thank you. Yes. So, meanwhile, I'm over time, but forgive me. Ethan's looking at Mercy. He hasn't let her have the marble. So she doesn't see everything the rest of them are seeing because Ethan's trying to like play her a little bit more softly. So it's more subtle, even though I'm like, it's got to be pretty obvious to her what's happening here. And he pulls out an envelope sealed with wax. And this is the message telling him that he has been demoted, essentially. The symbol of his family. They had rejected him. A gust of wind picked up, and he let it take the letter away. And again, that is such a theme in these books, is people being rejected and left on their own. And it's odd for Ethan to be in that position, considering how incredibly powerful he is. One wouldn't think that with the ability that he has, he would be anyone to get rejected. And yet here we are. So between the four of them, nobody wants any of them. Well, that's not true. Everybody wants Yaren, but they all want her for her abilities. There's no affection behind any of that, you know? So yeah, she's also sort of alone in the world. And then we get our last bit. Beginning report. The bleeding phoenix, its consciousness scattered over thousands of pieces, settles into wait. Many of its fragments go dormant, but many others go looking for hosts, to hunt and to build up their mother's power. It is biding its time for the moment when it senses its lost brother again. The silent king stirs in its dreams as it senses the phoenix in battle. For hundreds of miles, spirits and remnants feel its influence. Though they do not know the source, they are disturbed. The weeping dragon sleeps in the upper atmosphere on a miles-long bed of clouds. It has not been long since it last woke, and it is still weary. Though the power of the phoenix pricked its spirit, it will take more enticing bait to rouse the dragon from its slumber. In a chasm on the ocean's floor, the wandering titan rolls its stone joints. They have stiffened from long disuse. It wakes slowly but steadily. Soon it will rise. Suggested topic: Machiel's full influence on the fate of Cradle. Continue? Denied. Report complete. And that's the end of the book. Ah! I'm all about it. I'm all about it. I feel a little bit bad for Ethan, but also I'm so annoyed with him that I'm kind of like, well, what can you do, Ethan? Maybe don't be an asshole. I just want Ethan to, like, tell anybody about what it is he's trying to do here. He's playing everything so incredibly close to the vest. And to a point, I get that. But at another, like, I feel like there's parts of things that he could, like, let people in on and he isn't. And it's just very frustrating to watch. Just, dude, trust Cassius, maybe. Tell him a little bit about what it is that's going on. He's part of the bloodline. Maybe he'd want to help you. Maybe he would be able to help you. But no, he can't do that. Ugh. But I am really happy for Yaren for overpowering this piece of her, this uninvited guest. That's cool. Also, I should mention, I think this is the first book in which Lyndon does not advance, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's low gold for the entire book, right? Which is fine. I'm not mad about it, but I just thought that was interesting. It's really, a nice demonstration of how much greater a distance there is between different levels once you get higher up and into the gold tier. So, all right. Well, I'm so over time, so I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Andy, so much for commissioning this. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the coverage, and I'll be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.